Well, hello there. This is Cindy. So glad you could join us today. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait for you to hear today's episode. Before we dive in, though, just wanted to share a few ways that we can work together if you happen to be looking to uplevel your negotiation skills. I've got everything from online to group to mastermind VIP one-on-one sessions available to help you better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. So if that sounds interesting, check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And now the reason you are here on to today's program, I'm really happy to introduce you today to John Suzuki. We're going to be talking about negotiating past concentration camp internment. So that is an unusual, very interesting topic. If that didn't catch your attention, I don't know what will. So welcome, John. It's great to have you on the show.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who don't know, John Suzuki is an author, a speaker, a storyteller, an MC, and more. He's the author of American Grit. So in the full title, it's American Grit: From a Japanese American Concentration Camp Rises an American War Hero. I had the pleasure of meeting John briefly. I heard a little bit about his book and really wanted to share some of the insights with you. He's a professional speaker who inspires his audiences in really heartfelt and insightful ways. And he's also the host of a podcast called Finding Better, which provides weekly doses of inspiration and encouragement. We can all use more of that, especially these days. So, John, let's dig in. I'd love to hear how you came to write this book.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. So it's actually been a calling. I was minding my own business one day, and I'm Japanese American, and my dad fought in World War II. And so I knew about the concentration camps, and I'm a great student of World War II. And one day I found myself on a pilgrimage to a place called Minidoka. And I had no idea why I was going there. I just knew I had to be there. And on the third day of this pilgrimage, I came across a billboard. And on this billboard, and this is 3 days of learning about life in a concentration camp, how terrible it was. It was in the middle of a desert, 100-degree weather. There was barbed wire. It's not there anymore, but there was barbed wire, armed guards, a terrible condition, no plumbing. It was just terrible. And learning about all this, and then I come across this billboard, and this billboard had the names of 1,000 men who volunteered out of that concentration camp in Idaho to fight, and many died, for the United States Army, who put them and their families in that camp to begin with.
Incredible.
And, it was incredible. It was incredible. And these men, as bad as it was, and they volunteered to prove the loyalty of Japanese Americans during World War II. These men went on to become part of what was called the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which was a segregated war unit of Japanese Americans who went on to become the most decorated war unit in the history of the United States to this day for its size and duration. Wow. And I just went, how does this work? Yeah. Who would do such a thing? and that's how my journey started.
Oh, so exciting. And such an important story to tell. And I love, John, that you call it what it is, right? I mean, we hear all that language, internment camps or dislocation or whatever the heck they called it, right? As opposed, let's call it what it is. These were concentration camps from people who were American citizens, and I said the story is important, but I'd love your perspective on why you think the story is still important today.
I think it's hugely important. I started off talking about this as a cautionary tale, but the more that I went into this and the more that I learned, the more I realized it's not a cautionary tale. It's a cautionary wake-up call. Yeah. And, you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning it, I do call them out as concentration camps. Frankly, relocation camps and internment camps was a euphemism. And I think concentration camps in Europe is a euphemism for extermination camps. Yeah. And so, I'm calling it like it is. But, the reason why, there are a number of reasons why they happened in the United States. And I'm seeing a lot of those similar reasons happening today. And, it was about fear. It was about fear of war. Yeah. It was, and frankly, largely it was about our failed political leadership.
Yeah.
and a complicit press. Even Dr. Seuss was involved, for crying out loud,
Yeah.
on making Japanese on the West Coast through his cartoons look like really bad people.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah,
Oh, you're
yeah.
destroying one of my icons. That's
Uh,
wow.
he still is a hero of mine. He just messed up one time. That's all.
Wow. I did not know that. That's good to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And in today's world that I see a world of fear. I see a world of division where we're a divided country. I see a lot of failed political leadership. I see a complicit press. I see fear and blame being
Yes.
placed, victimhood. And so I see a lot of things that are really concerning to me. And, history forgotten or history not taught can often repeat itself.
Oh,
And mine
well,
is,
and thank you for calling that out. And I'm glad you're prepared to go there because it's a dicey subject these days. And I'm sure we'll get some pushback here, but I would love you to share, like, what are your thoughts on some of the current movements? I mean, we're hearing, it mortifies me to hear that, in certain pockets of the US in particular, they're looking to erase some of the history, eliminating books about historical events like slavery, for heaven's sake. So I'd love your thoughts on that and the risks that that brings.
so we need to come together, right? I mean, we're living in a world where we're really bucketizing people,
Yeah.
and we're dividing people purposely. And we're categorizing people. You got the whites and the blacks and the Christians
Yep.
and the Muslims and the gays and the straights.
Yeah.
And worse yet, did you know that in Africa, they don't call themselves blacks?
Mm.
They call themselves Nigerians.
Yeah.
They call themselves whatever country they're in.
I love that.
In Asia, Japanese people don't call ourselves Asians.
Yeah.
Neither do Koreans. Neither do Vietnamese, right?
Yeah,
And
that's a good
and in
point.
Europe, they don't call each other whites,
Yeah.
right?
That's
Right?
yes.
I mean, we don't, and yet we're categorizing people, and worse, today we're categorizing people based on ideology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happened to the intolerance? What happened to having civil conversations and agreeing to disagree?
Yeah.
And a lot of these topics are just so emotionally charged. And I fear that the blame and the victimhood part of what we're seeing these days, someone else is responsible for the problems I'm going through right now. And
Yeah.
so it's that fear. You take all these things that are happening right now, and then you add on top of that something really bad happening,
Yeah.
right? And the fact of the matter is, it's inevitable that really bad things are going to happen to us.
Yeah.
It just is, right? And so, how do you contain that powder keg? How do you
Yeah.
contain that potential release of really bad decisions? And I think that it's a big part of it is awareness and helping people know and understand what's going on.
And I love that word bucketizing that you said. We are bucket. That is so, I hadn't heard that before. And I love that. I saw it in your book as well. And I'm like, well, that is interesting. And so hit the nail on the head, as they say. And it's interesting to me when I saw it, I thought, wow, this is, I mean, it reinforces philosophies that I have and my concerns about today, that we are making each other other, right? When we make other people the other, we're dehumanizing them. And if you look through history, most of the mass genocide started that way. I mean, not to be overly dramatic, but in Nazi Germany, right? They made the people who were the targets other, right? Different than. In Rwanda, they made them different and other. And I agree with you. I think we are seeing a lot of these warning signs, and we're like ostriches with our heads in the sand. And it really struck me when you said that the American concentration camps are in our future. That was a pretty ballsy kind of statement, and I'd love to have you expound a little bit on why you think that's the case, and how can we stop that?
Well, the biggest part of why I think they're in our future, they don't have to be. They don't have to be, and that's part of why we're having this conversation. They don't have to be, right? But I think left unattended, that we're seeing the recipe for disaster happening all over again.
Yeah.
And the biggest way, to me, I think the biggest way, for the best way or the most important way, is for all of us to get in front of it and to be aware that this stuff can happen. Look, so before World War II happened, these people, they happen to be, the folks that were affected by the concentration camps here in America happen to be the wrong race.
Yeah.
Okay, they happen to be Japanese, and many of them were Japanese Americans. All of them were legal residents.
Yeah.
But 50,000 among the 122,000 people that were affected, 50,000 of them were children and babies.
That's shocking.
And look at this, and look, these guys, imagine you're at dinner, you're just having a great time, that you're just living a normal life, right?
Yeah.
Any one of us, every one of us, forget if you're not Japanese,
Yeah.
right? He could be, I'll use today's terms, he could be white or black or Asian or whatever it is, Hispanic, I don't care. You and you're just living a normal life. And then all of a sudden you're told that because of who you are, not that you committed any crimes, not that you've been accused of any crimes,
Yeah.
but just because of who you are, you have to be locked up. You have to be locked up in a place where you don't know where you're going. You don't know if you're going to be, the only reference point you have is a Holocaust happening in Europe right now. So you don't know if you're going to be shot or killed.
Yeah.
And all you can take with you is what you can carry for a period of time that you have no idea how long you're going to be gone. You don't know where you're going, what to pack for, any of that stuff. And all of a sudden you're on a bus or a train to a really terrible place. That happened. It happened. You're
It's
just living a
staggering.
normal life.
Like, it's really staggering. And I agree with you. I think the thing we need to do is be talking about this so that we don't forget our history, so that we don't repeat our history. We need to elevate our awareness. And I'd love, switching gears for a bit, in your research, I'd love if you determined or have any thoughts about some of the ways that people negotiate past horrific circumstances like this. Like you mentioned about the honor roll, like countless Japanese, victims, if I will, had been held in concentration camps, who volunteered to fight for America. So what are some ways that people can negotiate with themselves to move past their circumstances?
So yeah, negotiating with themselves, but also knowing who to negotiate with outside of yourself.
Good
right?
point.
And it's really important. To me, the most important thing for us to be aware of is that it is our political leadership. It is they who made the decisions, whatever those decisions were based on. I mean, there's a whole sub-story about the greed and the envy that was behind what was happening with the Japanese in the United States. But, in this case, what they decided to do, what a lot of them decided to do was that in order for them to get out of these camps and get their families out of these camps, somehow they needed to prove that they were loyal Americans and that they deserved to be Americans just like anybody else. And so they weren't able to talk to President Roosevelt, who signed the executive order putting them in those camps to begin with, right? And look, just a real side quick comment. This is not an indictment on President Roosevelt. In a lot of ways, he was one of the greatest presidents we ever had. He made a really bad decision.
Yeah.
A really bad decision. He was influenced by people who had their own agendas. Sound familiar with what's going on today?
Yes.
Right? So, there's no way that these folks in the camps could have gotten to the president of the United States, obviously.
Yeah.
So they decided to take matters into their own hands, and they volunteered. A bunch of the men volunteered, and this act of volunteering within the camps was created huge uproar within the camps. It pitted families against families and brothers against brothers, and they were going, "What do you mean you're going to go fight for the country that put us in this camp, right? And you need to stay here. We need to fight for our rights anyway." And so, but a lot of them decided that the best way to make sure that they didn't have to live in those camps for the rest of their lives, because nobody knew, right, was to go out and prove their loyalty. Yeah. And so they did. They volunteered, and a lot of them died. Imagine this: our armies and our military and our country is fighting overseas during World War II for freedom and democracy. And in our own country, we're taking American
Yeah.
citizens and we're throwing them in concentration camps.
Yeah. Well, it isn't the first time we've been hypocritical, and it certainly won't be the
Right?
last, sadly. But one thing
Yeah.
I want to commend you, John. One of the things I really noticed that I love is that you're very intentional with your language. And I noticed that even talking about like Roosevelt, you separate the person from their actions. And we don't do that enough, right? We condemn people
Exactly.
and judge them, and everything becomes very personalized rather than judging the conduct and the decisions that are made. Same when you spoke to Dr. Seuss, it was like, okay, he made a bad call on this or was on the wrong side of that. Now, you've talked about that negotiate, and that was an interesting perspective. Like as a way to negotiate out of their circumstances, they volunteered, and then there's the negotiation within the community and the negotiation
Absolutely.
externally. And I often say that our first and most important negotiation is with ourselves, right? Negotiating our mindset. And I'm just wondering, especially as a guy who does Finding Better as the podcast, you're obviously going to have a very positive outlook. Can you share some tips with our listeners about how to negotiate our mindset to help us step into the light, just generally in these difficult times?
Yeah. First part is awareness. The first part is awareness.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the things that people aren't aware of, we know, but we're not aware of it, is that it's yours to make decisions. And a lot of times we're not even aware of decisions that we're making, or that we have a choice and that a decision needs to be made.
Yeah.
So in this case, right, making sure that we educate people is the first part, but then people making decisions and saying, okay, what if I start seeing the telltale signs again?
Yeah.
And we are,
Yes.
right? Okay, what are we going to do about it? How are we going? And part of this, to me, we're all here. One reason why we're all here is to make the world better than the day we landed on it.
Yeah.
And to love one another. And the additional part to being aware and stop bucketizing people is to bring a little bit more love into the world, right? And understand that it's our relationships with each other.
Yeah.
It's our relationships with each other in terms of being human that really define who we are.
I love that. And I want to pick at that thread about love, because I know you advocate that the secret to our future is less fear, more love, which I assume is one of the reasons you do your inspirational podcast. How can our listeners sort of negotiate past, because there is such a climate of fear now. Our media, but sadly, negative news sells more. At least that's the story they tell themselves. And we're just inundated with this constant fear mongering. So what are some ways you advocate to lean more into the love and get away from that fear?
I have this podcast called Finding Better because I believe that when people are happy, they have a better chance of making the world happy.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that we individually make up the world, right? And every one of us has a power within ourselves to achieve whatever it is we can think of.
Yeah.
And so the reason for my podcast is, it's not, there's so much, I'm just going to say it, Cindy, crap out there. There's just so much stuff out there, and people are being, I heard, and I don't have the I don't have the backup, but I heard that people on Instagram check out Instagram on average 150 times a day. Social media has been a wonderful thing for us. Technology has been a wonderful thing to us, but it has come with lots of unintended consequences. Yeah. Many of which were intended by the people who are running it.
Yes.
And so my concern is that, we're constantly being told that we're not adequate.
Yeah.
That you have to buy this product and you'll be better, or you have to look like me. Look at me. Yeah. Aren't I cool? Right. Yeah. And we get so, I read a Forbes health article at the beginning of this year, and it said that the number one New Year's resolution for 2023 was no longer to lose weight, as it has been for eons, right? It was about mental health.
Okay. Yeah.
And I just went, wow. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, I think, what you're doing, Cindy, I mean, for me, we need to help people in loving themselves. Yeah. We need help people be better for themselves, better Better individuals lift the world. When an individual is lifted, so lifted is the world. And so I think that if we can help people in that light, one person at a time, it's going to help. But the political leadership is a big thing that we need to keep
but I want to
attention.
put a pin in that individual thing, because I think people underestimate that, right? We assume, oh, what can I do? I'm only one person. So I really love, John, when you had said, like, one person at a time, as we shine our light, when we let ourselves be happy, when we push past the fear and choose to lean into love, that there's a ripple effect that comes with that. And I'd love your thoughts on to what extent that helps us maybe negotiate past the polarization and divisiveness that we're seeing across the world today.
So I think, one thing on negotiation, right? Let me just give you a funny little example.
Yeah.
When my son, who's my kids are all grown up now, but when my son was little, I gave him an Oreo, and I said, okay, so you got this Oreo. I want you to share it.
Yeah.
Okay, I want you to share it. And so he went to his sister, and he's cuts off a little piece, and he's trying to keep the biggest pieces for himself, right? So then I said, good job, Michael. So then I gave him a stack full of Oreos.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably had 50 Oreos in it. I said, I want you to go share it. And so now all of a sudden he's going, Kristen, have a dozen Oreos, right? And he's right. And so for me, a big part of negotiation is where you're negotiating from. And to me, if you're given, you can negotiate from a place of taking or a place from giving or a balance of both.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're living in a world of scarcity, you're going to negotiate one way.
Yes.
If you're living in a world of abundance, you're gonna negotiate a different way. And so too is our emotions. I think I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a guy that's been around for 62 years, right? But it seems to me that the happier a person is, the more happiness they're going to share.
This is so brilliant. I mean, it is so simple and so profound. And it's funny, you probably saw me scratching as you started talking. I'm writing down abundance versus scarcity. And then you went right there. And again, I want to put a pin in that for our listeners, because this isn't rocket science. And yet we are being inundated with messages that make us feel overwhelmed. Like this is beyond any one of us. And John, I couldn't agree with you more. Choose to come from an abundance mindset, right? Many things happen in life that we can't control, but we can choose how we want to react. We control how we're going to react, how we're going to choose to show up every day. So I love your messaging on this. I love it. And I loved a quote of yours that I came across. You said something about that we have 3 careers in life and went through. Can you share that with our listeners? I think it'll fit nicely with this conversation.
Yeah, we do. In my view, we do have 3 careers. The first is to learn, which is about learning to go to school and learning. The second is to earn a living, a respectable living for yourself and your family. And the third is returning and giving back. So it's learn, earn, and return. And you can look at it in maybe 30-year segments. This is all general. And they all intermix, right? I mean, while you're earning, you're also giving back. I think that there comes a point in time when it's ours to give back. It's ours to give back and help folks just as other folks helped us.
Yeah.
Make the world a little bit better.
It's so beautiful. And it ties back to that abundance versus scarcity, because I think the sooner in life you adopt an abundance mindset and choose that over the scarcity mongering that we're constantly inundated with, the earlier you start that return phase, right?
That's right.
I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful model. And did you do much work, sir? I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but it just struck me about the reparations negotiations. Did you do any research about that?
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. Absolutely. So there was a movement in the early 80s where they talked about reparations, where they talked about the reparations for the victims of the concentration camps. And in 1988, the president signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 that provided for an official U.S. apology to all the folks that were affected, and also included $20,000 for each one of the surviving camp victims at that time. Unfortunately, by 1988, over 40 years had passed, and most of the adults at the time during World War II had passed away. So the folks that got the payment were not old enough to have had all their property taken away. Most of those folks had passed away, but they were affected, and they were in the camps. Some of them were born in the camps. Some of them spent 3 years of their life in the camps.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing about it that was really interesting was that it wasn't so much the money that they were interested in, but it was the official apology.
Yeah.
It was the recognition that a terrible wrong had
Yeah.
been done to American citizens, right?
Yes.
To
Yeah.
citizens of this country.
Yeah.
And so, but you know what had happened, so 43 years prior, what happened when they closed the camps was people were evicted from their homes all over again, right? Yes,
Yeah.
the camps were the camps, but they made it their homes and their communities. They built their schools, they built hospitals, they built police forces, they built everything. And they were given $25 and a one-way bus ticket and said, "Thank you very much, please leave."
Incredible. Wow.
To start all over. So fast forward 40 years, there was a movement that happened for 10 years prior to that. But over those 10 years, they were able to negotiate, and President Reagan was the president that signed
Yeah.
the Civil Liberties Act.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it's interesting because I mean the money is like a token, could never ever repay, right, the indignity and the injustice. But I agree with you. I think it's the acknowledgement piece, which also helps to foster the awareness piece, which is really so important, so that we don't keep repeating history and making these same kind of mistakes.
yeah,
So
yeah. Just one quick thing. So when we talk about potential concentration camps happening again, 9/11, and I just want, we have the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 and all this kind of stuff. 9/11 happens.
yes.
Then someone comes up with a misguided idea that all Muslims must be terrorists.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting at that time was that one group that rose up against any idea of concentration, and the misguided idea included, so we got to round them all up.
Yeah.
And put them away. One of the groups that came out very, very forcefully was a Japanese American community. But there was one thing that very few people know about, was that there was a man who was in President Bush's cabinet. He was a transportation secretary named Norman Mineta.
Yeah.
Norman Mineta was in a concentration camp when he was a child. And so when President Bush got together with his advisors, he told his advisors, "Whatever you do, do not come to me with a solution that involves what that guy went through when he was a child."
Wow.
And so, but the point isn't so much that President Bush did that and that the Japanese helped. The point is that the idea came up again.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And this was that. So it's crazy. Then you fast forward to what happened during COVID.
Yes.
And I mean, the Chinese hate.
Yes.
And for crying out loud,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for calling that out again. And thank you for the work that you're doing around this, because I didn't know some of that. And but I am very cognizant, because I thought the same thing, 9/11, it was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. And with COVID, both in terms of the racial discrimination that we saw immediately, it's every time we're faced with fear, we immediately resort. So I love your messaging about replace that fear with love. But even the sort of the whole anti-vaxxer versus whatever, I mean, regardless of where people fall on the spectrum, there were legitimate considerations at both ends of the spectrum. And if there was ever a time to be having intelligent discourse to make sure we came up with the best solutions, that would have been it. And again, that fear overrode, and we missed that opportunity. So what was one of the most surprising things you discovered while researching your book, John?
Probably the most surprising thing that I learned is how similar the world is, and in some cases worse.
That's true.
Than what it was like in before World War II. And as I mentioned, I mean, let's face it, bad things are going to happen. I mean, something bad is going to happen to this country.
Yeah.
Right. And left unattended, and this can happen again. So we have to get in front of this.
Yeah.
Another thing, really heartbreaking thing that I realized as I was writing this book is that, I mentioned to you about the volunteers who went out and fought for the United States Army.
Yeah.
A lot of them died.
Yeah.
Now imagine this. When a soldier dies at war, a military contingent of officers goes to that person's home.
Yeah.
And presents their family with a gold star and an American flag.
Yeah.
These families were in concentration camps. Now imagine you're in a concentration camp and you are being approached by a military contingent.
Oh.
And they died fighting for freedom. And you're in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
Imprisoned by the same army that's presenting you with an American flag.
Yeah.
And there was just, there's just,
yeah,
it's stories like that people aren't aware of or don't think about, are just really heartbreaking. And the kinds of stories that keep me going, like this can't happen again.
Yes. Yes. And now I think you're right about the needing that wake up call, that this is no longer a cautionary tale. It is definitely a cautionary wake up call.
Yeah.
And thank you for your book and for getting the message out there. And this has been just a fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed this. And I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to do with your book or even this issue at all, but just one of those moments where you have a sort of a little mini epiphany that changes how you think about things or show up.
That's a really interesting question. And the first thing that comes to my mind, and this was a really big thing that I realized as I was writing this book, is my life changed when I really, really learned from writing this book to live with gratitude.
Yes.
To live with gratitude. I learned from this book, these people didn't have plumbing. So all of a sudden, I'm looking at my toilet going, holy cow, I'm really thankful for you, buddy.
Yes.
The air that we breathe, the places that wherever you are, whatever your circumstances are, we all have so much to be grateful for. And as we talk about the press and we talk about the pressures in life and we talk about everything that's going on and the inadequacies that we're being convinced of, we need to stop and just take a moment and look around, right? And be thankful. The one time, real quick, that really, really hit me was when I was in the hospital. And I kept negotiating, saying, when I get out of here, I promise. Boy, you sure learn to appreciate your health when you're in the hospital, right?
That's so true.
We have so much to be thankful for. And so that attitude of gratitude, I think, is really important.
Oh, and what a beautiful note to end on, because it circles back so beautifully. I think when we come from a place of gratitude, we are more open to an abundant mindset. We are more open to love. It's impossible to be in a state of anger and fear and negative emotion when you allow yourself to get in a state of gratitude. So that is really a powerful message. And interestingly, I heard relatively recently as well that even the most impoverished among us today in North America live infinitely better than people did hundreds of years ago. When you think about it, I mean, better than many royalty, frankly, from, hundreds of years ago. So,
right.
So tell us, John, where can people learn more about you?
Well, they can go to my website. My website is John Suzuki, just like the motorcycle.com. and they can learn about me, and if they want to get in touch with me, they can get my information there.
Beautiful. And again, make sure to check out that book as well. American Grit. Love the title, by the way. From a Japanese American concentration camp rises an American war hero. Definitely worth a read. Keep raising our awareness. So thanks so much, John.
Can I just make one quick comment?
Of course.
It's called, a friend of mine told me, he said, your book is called American Grit. And when people think of those words, American Grit, most people probably don't think about a bunch of Japanese guys. A bunch of Japanese Americans running around. And but thank you so much for having me, Cindy. It's been wonderful.
Oh, I love that. And I love that messaging again. I want to just put a little pin in that for our listeners out there, because be open to the fact that your perspectives may be skewed. We are terrible perspective takers. And that is such a beautiful illustration of that, John, like American Grit. And that subject matter is about Japanese who were mistreated and often overlooked. And as you say, were the ones to speak up immediately when they started seeing that same discrimination be perpetrated against people post 9/11. So beautiful message. The book is definitely worth a read. And I'm sure you've all got loads of value from this episode. This has been such an interesting conversation. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that yet. And I often say, give the gift of sharing. This is an important conversation. We need to be having this conversation, elevating this conversation. So make sure to share this episode with other people in your circle so we can start spreading this message. And make sure to grab a copy of my book if you haven't done that yet, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. It is available on Amazon in a local bookstore close to you. So to make sure to grab a copy of that and let me know what you think of it. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.